Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. Yes, it's time for another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother, and I always shout out to my friends in California, in the Ventura area at KPPQLP 104.1 FM. Thank you guys for broadcasting my show, and thank you all the listeners. I wish I could be in California with you, but I'm glad that we are in this show together. This show also streams on the MyTuner app, and that's capsmedia.org/radio. And in just a minute, I'm going to speak with a gentleman who's a contributor to the Huffington Post and is an author of 2 books. And I believe he's the very first grandfather that I've ever interviewed for this show, which is really exciting. We're going to find out about the role my guest mother played in his life and also his perspective of how his daughters are raising their kids today and the generational differences of raising children. Hello, Grandpa Jeffrey, and welcome to my podcast.
Great to be here. You can call me Gramps, and you're making me feel old since I'm the only grandpa you talk to.
Well, I've interviewed many grandmothers. You're just on the pedestal at this moment because you're the first grandfather. And I apologize if I'm making a mistake to any of my other guests, but I believe that you are. So nice to have you on the show. It's an absolute pleasure.
It's a real honor on my part, sir.
So we are going to get to your latest book called I Don't Want to Turn 3, which features your grandchildren. But initially, we're going to start off with getting to know your mom and the role she played in your life. And are you who you are today because of or in spite of your mom? And I usually start off by asking your mother's name, or how did you refer to your mom?
Oh, well, obviously I call her Mom, but her name was Faye. And all her friends called her Faye. So we grew up in small town Ohio, and it was my brother and myself, and we were very lucky because my uncle lived up the street and my grandmother lived a couple blocks away, so it was a real family unit. And so, yeah, with my brother and I, we loved our mother. And it was a country that we were 50 miles away from the big town of Columbus, so we had our all small town. But she was from the big town of Columbus, so we went to visit her relatives every other weekend.
And was it the kind of thing where you could just go out the door and go play with your friends and you knew to come home for dinner?
Oh, yeah. Again, that's a whole different world than it is today. But yes, when we were growing up, that's what we did, played baseball, basketball. We knew it was time to come home when it was dark. But, one of the things you asked me is, how did your mother influence you? What did she do that you can say you can put your finger on it right now? And I got to tell you, what she did really affects me today on how I live today is she made us read books. My brother and I, we out and played, just like you said. We come home for dinner, and by 7 o'clock, no more TV. We had to go in and read books. And, obviously when we were little, she read them to us, and my dad read them to us. But as we grew older, she no TV. It was reading books time. So that had a big influence on what I'm doing today. And
did your mom ever work?
She was a receptionist for a doctor. So she did work. And my father was an entrepreneur, and he had his own business, and he was working many, many hours too. So, yeah, that was it. So, that was one influence she had on me. Another influence that she had on me is her positive attitude. I mean, her feeling was the glass was always half full. It was never half empty. It was always half full. So we were always looking at the bright side of life. What can we do to improve our lives and even help others? So all that came from her.
Can you give us some specific ideas of the kind of volunteer work you would do around town helping out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we always were at the food drives. I mean, we were at the, St. Vincent de Paul, where we were doing, passing out the breakfast and the Christmas and the Thanksgiving. It was all part of our life. In other words, that was part of what we did. Our part of what we did was to give back to others, to help the less fortunate. Because she felt very fortunate that we have a pretty good lifestyle. So she wanted to make sure that she ingrained in my brother and myself that that we can't forget about other people, because this world is hard, and she knew it.
And are you and your brother very similar, or describe the relationship between you and your brother and the impact your mom had? Is it the same or different on the two of you?
Well, it really is interesting how kids are so different.
Yes.
Okay? In other words, when we start talking about my grandkids, they're all different. And so my brother and I were different. We took different lives. We took different paths. But I think we were both influenced, and, that part of you got to make sure you look out for other people. I think both of us have a piece of that.
Well, that's good. So it really rubbed off. And
Yes.
and what role did your maternal grandmother play in your childhood, or your paternal grandmother?
Well, my maternal grandmother died when I was like 5 or 6, so it played very little. But my paternal grandmother lived until she was 94. And talk about influence. I mean, here was a sweet lady. She had lost her husband, dying of a heart attack when he was 49. She took in one of her nephews to live with her because his parents had died. So she raised him just like she was. And she really was this sweet lady who always was smiling. And when you have grandparents like that, it makes you feel like, they're really, this is a great world. I mean, so she went through all kinds of hardships, yet she was the one smiling, and she was the one that lived forever. I mean, we all wish we could live until we're 90, especially with the attitude that she had. And so, I remember when I was having my kids, and we were interviewing her on what would she like to do in life, and she just kept saying, "I just want to help others." And I think that's a trait that many of these grandmothers have. Once they pass 70 and 80, they kind of realize, they're special because they're still here.
It's very true, but I'm sure she suffered quite a bit, her generation, your grandmother, and maybe perhaps that helped her feel more fortunate.
Well, yeah, and you think about today's world. I mean, how many people have we lost because of this pandemic that should have lived until their 70s or 80s or 90s? We all have to take advantage of every single day because we don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow. So, it brings it back home is, if you have all these conflicts, why go through it? Because you may not be here. You've got to be able to take advantage of every single day and maximize how you can contribute to the world during that time.
Oh my gosh, it sounds exactly like my mom. She would always say, "What are you doing for the world?" when she'd be frustrated with us. We had to give a percentage of our allowance, which was change,
Right.
A percentage had to go to charity. But I'm so glad she taught us that. It was the beginning of everything for us. How about your mother? Please tell us a little bit about her upbringing and how many siblings she has.
My mother was the youngest of 3 children. Her 2 older brothers were, one was 7 years older, the other was 3 years older. And we've got to give these people a lot of credit. They grew up during the Depression. They grew up during the World War II. This was the greatest generation this country has ever produced when you think about it. They're the ones that kept us and kept democracy going. They're the ones that fought to keep this world free. Her 2 older brothers were in the army, and so they were in Europe fighting for us. And then they came home. So if you take a look at generations, my mother's generation really was the greatest generation ever. They saved the world, they came home, and then they built America. They built the suburbs, they built the businesses, and I think they learned from all that hardship. And I think that's one of the reasons that my mother was so optimistic, because she grew up in this hardship kind of a generation where, when it all came to the end and they were victorious, that they really learned how to live.
Well, live and work together. They were so selfless that they all pulled together, the commonality of it. It would be wonderful if we could have that repeated again instead of a current divide. But I don't want to get into politics at all. I'm more interested in matters of the heart. You've mentioned your mom had a huge influence on your life, including the reading of the books and the generosity and kindness to others. Did she ever go to college?
Yes, they both, my mother and dad, went to Ohio State University. And what was a lot of fun about, maybe 15 years ago, we live here in Arizona, and so Ohio State University was having their alumni meeting, and I took them to this alumni meeting. They were the oldest people there. It was great.
Oh,
they had
great.
all these people from Ohio State that graduated years and years ago, but they were the oldest people from Ohio State, and the attention they got from all these young kids was spectacular. It just shows you how important and this older generation is. Because as we all grow older, we grow wiser. If you take a look at all these decades, we start to add up. We learn a lot, and the reason we learn a lot is because we make a lot of mistakes. And so, as you get into your 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, like my great-grandmother did, you become so wise. And it's behemoth of all of us younger people to just kind of absorb that wisdom, because that's the only way we're going to get it.
You've mentioned that your mom is very optimistic. I'm assuming she had a normal, ordinary, happy, hopefully very happy childhood.
Yes. From the stories she told, it sounded like she was just a normal kid, which is great. And hopefully the kids we're bringing up today will turn into normal kids too, without war and without depression and all that. So, yeah, she grew up to be just a happy-go-lucky girl.
And when you close your eyes and you see, sense, and feel your mom as a child, what's a memory that is pretty impactful to you?
Well, it's security. In other words, with everything else that was going on in the world, we could always go home and feel secure. You felt love. You felt protected. And so, that's what she was to us.
Was it the kind of thing where you guys would get hugs all the time, or was it actions or words that you felt that?
A combination. I think that when you look back and you think about what is love, one of the most important things that I learned from her, and hopefully we are all teaching others, is when you love, you will teach others how to love. So I think that if the older generation can teach this younger generation how to love, they will learn how to love.
Wow. Gramps Jeffrey, I love that. It seems really so simple, and yet it's a lot harder than that, because it doesn't seem to be as readily available with the way life is being lived by so many people today. And there's a difference in how kids are being raised today.
Well, let's talk about kids, because this is what my book's all about. And let's talk about this latest and greatest generation compared to the generation of when I grew up. As a baby boomer, trying to understand how the world evolved since I was 3 years old, it was also part of my story in my book. My parents didn't have cell phones. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have cable TV. They didn't have remotes. I was my mom's remote. She'd say, "Son, go change the channel." Go change the channel. So, my parents' definition of discipline is quite different than parents of today. Has today's world made for a better place for children to grow up? I'll let your listeners kind of answer that question, and weigh in how they were treated growing up compared to how we were treated as growing up today. So this generation, and I really do feel that the kids that are 1 to 10 years old today are going to become the greatest, the best generation this country has ever produced. They are the ones that are going to lead us into more democracy and more getting together, more harmony. And why do I say that? Well, first of all, this is the first generation that really was brought up on the internet. Okay? These 2, 3, 4-year-olds, they understand how to use the internet. They understand how to use cell phones. They understand all the information, how to do iPads. They are getting and learning so much faster than any other generation ever that, they are going to be smart. Now, it's up to us, you and me, to learn from our parents and balance what these kids are learning today through all the internet and electronics to what the wisdom that we can present to them about living life and what are the most important things in life and what we need to do. So it's just so important for baby boomers today to get involved with their grandchildren because they need that balance based on everything else they're learning through the internet.
They definitely need balance because the technology is not good for anyone, I believe. Now, you were talking about discipline before. What were your mom's tactics for disciplining you and your brother or your brother?
Oh, well, discipline has changed a lot since today.
No, I want to hear about your day, your mom.
In my day, if my mother got upset with my brother and myself, she would say, "Wait till your dad gets home." Okay? And so my dad would come home, he'd whip off his belt, and he would chase us around the kitchen table with his belt. That was discipline. So we were given the fear of God. Now, my dad had this fraternity paddle. And, he used that also besides his belt. And so one night when they weren't in the house, my brother and I went into their bedroom and we got his fraternity paddle. And it was late fall and the leaves were on the ground and we took it outside and we buried it in the leaves. And the next night it snowed and, piled onto the snow with the leaves. And that spring, when we went out to look for the paddle, it was gone. And to me, that was a miracle. The paddle was gone. Our lives would change. And that was discipline in my day. Now, our generation realized that that's not really a great way to bring up kids and the fear that we had. So our generation was a little different. And we weren't running around the kitchen table with belts. We were using psychology. Why did you do this, getting in trouble, grounding them and things like that. We weren't beating these little kids. And then our generation, our kids, have taken it a step further, and they really have perfected how to raise up these kids. A majority of the kids nowadays send their little ones to timeout. So they have to go in the corner and look at the wall. Kids don't like that because, they don't want to be all by themselves. They don't like to be separated from their friends. And so that's how it has all changed. And I think it's for the better.
So when your dad would chase you around the table and you went out and you hid the paddle, did you ever, as you got older, was that conversation ever brought up again? Did you ever find out what happened to the paddle?
No, and he never knew either. We never, ever told him what we did. Even when he was on his deathbed, we never told him.
And he never asked you?
He never asked.
He knew. Did your mom play, was it like good cop, bad cop?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe that's why we liked her so much. She was the good cop.
Well, Mom. So once the gauntlet was thrown down, she called a spade and let it go at that. She didn't come and support you and hug you and comfort you after a discipline from your dad.
No, she reinforced it. So in other words, she obviously supported her husband. And so she's the one to warn us about it when he was going to come home, and then obviously he followed through.
Well, let's hope all of that is a thing of the past, right? You've been busy writing a book, and the latest one has to do with your grandkids, and you love spending time with your grandkids. What is it that inspired you or motivated you to take this step to write a book? Because that's not an easy thing. What is it? Was it one thing or more than one thing that got you motivated?
Well, living this past year because of the pandemic caused by COVID-19, in isolation, except for being able to be with my family, gave me a special time to watch and interact with all these grandkids. I got to tell you, what a trip. All 6 of these grandkids have completely different personalities, but the one thing they do have in common is their sense of curiosity and how excited they do get when they do accomplish something new. So watching them grow year to year and how they interact with each other really is the basis for this book.
When you spend time reading with your grandchildren, it must bring memories back of you and your mom when you were young, because you said that that's what it was very important to her, that you guys spent time reading. I loved when I read to my boys. We read everything from the Harry Potters together to the little ABC books, and it was really, really a memorable time in all of our lives.
Well, when you sit back and think about it, there are all kinds of benefits to reading to your children. One of the benefits is the bonding. It gives you a chance to really spend time together. I mean, if the child, and I'm looking at it from a grandparent standpoint, but the same thing from a parent standpoint, child sitting on your lap, you're spending time together. It really helps that bonding process. Because again, when you're a grandparent, you may not live in the same area that your kids live in, like you did when you were a child. So bonding is important. Another thing about reading to books to kids is it supports listening skills. Now, you and I both know, as we grow older, that listening skills is the most important skill that we can acquire. Because if we learn how to listen, then we can communicate better. We can really sell better. We do whatever we can in our life as long as we're listening. So the benefits of reading to your kids creates the sense of supporting the listening skills. It helps with the cognitive and language development. I mean, there are plenty of words in all these books that they do not understand, so it gives you a chance to explain it to them, helps them really learn and learn more than just what they do during the day. And then it also helps with attention span. These little kids, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, they like to bounce off the walls. They're all over the place. But if you have them sitting in your lap for 15, 20 minutes, it helps with that whole attention span and the key concentration and self-discipline skills that they're going to need later in life.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And there are other ways. That one-on-one time, I think we both agree, is the most important, whether you're doing art together or cooking or cleaning up the yard, all of those things where it is unique one-on-one time. Obviously, reading books together is both of our favorites. I'm curious, though, what was your mom's specialty from the kitchen? Did you have a favorite recipe that she would make for you? Did you guys cook? You and your brother cook with your mom? Tell me a little bit about what that was like.
Oh yeah. She made she made the best brisket, and so we would help her make the brisket. That was the reward. Once a month we get a little brisket. She would do it.
Do you have her recipe?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good. Maybe you could send it to me. I can envision you and your brother in the kitchen with your mom. You just sounded like a little kid. You just went to this place that was so dreamy and full of wonderful memories. What a pleasure speaking with you. Gramps Jeffrey is my guest. His most recent book, I Don't Want to Turn 3. And he's written others, also a contributor to Huffington Post. I want to thank you for joining me, Gramps. It's been a real pleasure. My first grandpa on Should Have Listened to My Mother. And thank you for sharing stories about your mom, Faye.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
I'm Jackie Tantillo. We'll be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.